Hi fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. I'm fantasy writer Neil Mach, the author of Moondog and the Reed Leopard, and I want to share my love of folklore, local history and nature mythology with writers and creatives like you on my regular podcasts. It's designed with fellow indie publishers and writers in mind, but all fans of fantasy fiction are very welcome to join in. In my fantasy writer's kit bag, writers, artists and creatives will find lots of ideas and discussion about things such as potions, dark arts, fabulous creatures, folktale studies, nature lore, and the interesting history behind the myth and magic that underpins our understanding of the fictional universe. What I've been up to. My trip to Exmoor. So last weekend I went for a recovery weekend to Exmoor. Well-earned recovery, I might add, because the week before that I was spending 7 days in France dealing with my younger daughter's wedding. But anyway, Exmoor, E-X-M-O-O-R, is a picturesque area of hilly moorland in West Somerset and parts of North Devon, and it's situated on the southwest peninsula of England. The ancient area is about 250 square miles of moorland, and it's named after the River Exe. If you can picture the personification of Britain in the form of Britannia, and you can imagine her facing the Atlantic with her left foot and her left ankle pointing towards America. That's the southwest peninsula, her ankle and her left foot. For those of you who are unfamiliar with moor, and you might be, although we have several moors in British Isles, and we even have one in Staines actually, where I live, about 10 minutes from my home along the river. Britain has over 10% of all the world's moorland. So let me describe it to you. A moorland is an upland habitat characterised by low-growing vegetation on acid soils. And moors were considered to be rare and vulnerable habitats since probably Victorian times. And in fact, Staines Moor, which I just told you about, where I live, has been almost continuously under threat from land developers and from those who wish to exploit the minerals and the gravel beneath the acid soil. And the new threat to my local moor comes from plans to expand Heathrow Airport. Anyway, moors differ from heaths, or also known as heathland, because they are generally high up on higher ground. And they also have less gentle topography and a cooler and damper climate. So nearby to us is some famous Surrey heathland. In fact, there's the whole area of Surrey called the Surrey Heath. And heaths were probably man-made and probably manufactured around about 6,000 years ago by the late Stone Age or the Bronze Age people for agricultural purposes. And even now, the ones in Surrey and probably around the whole country are managed for grazing, even though they are often kept as important and significant habitats. Anyway, back to Exmoor. So Exmoor is a moorland and was once a royal forest and a hunting ground, and was designated a national park in 1954 and declared an environmentally sensitive area in 1993. And the coastline on the moor between Porlock and Foreland Point, which is an area I explored when I was on my visit this weekend, forms the longest stretch of coastal woodland in England and Wales. And this scenery includes magical waterfalls, dark caves, rocky headlands and steep ravines. And whilst I was walking along, I found what can only be described really as a dingly dell where you'd expect to see fairy folk. At Paracoombe, along this stretch of the coastline, there is a Neolithic henge. So we can guess that the moorland has been inhabited since at least Stone Age times. Exmoor is recorded in the Domesday Book, 1087, and there is evidence that sheep have grazed on the moor for about at least 3,000 years. The area, in fact, was the centre of the wool trade in the Middle Ages, and I visited Dunster whilst I was there, which was the centre of the wool business in medieval times. On my visit to Exmoor, I saw Exmoor ponies. These are a distinct breed of pony, and I noticed that they stood in groups of about 10 or 12 around thorn trees on top of the moorland. Exmoor ponies are believed to be probably the oldest remaining wild horses in Europe. Sightings of the famous beast of Exmoor, which I will cover later in the show, first started to be reported in 1970, although after 1983 and the loss of several scores of sheep, possibly 100 or so, the government took action and sent in the Royal Marines to try to hunt down the elusive creature. The beast of Exmoor is believed to be an alien big cat. And pixies are also associated with the moor. Piskies are normally associated with Cornish moors, but pixies are said to congregate around the Exmoor High Moor, and they perhaps inhabit stone circles, barrows, dolmens and ringforts. They might also live underground in the spectacular cave systems that are seen in this area. Pixie mythology is believed to predate the Roman invasion of Britain, and in early Christian era, pixies were said to be souls of children who died unbaptized. Later, in the 19th century, some historians suggested that the name Pixie was a racial remnant of the Pictic tribes, Pictic, who used to paint their skin blue, although this theory has now been largely debunked. Several Exmoor place names are associated with pixies, and they even have a Pixie Day that takes place annually in the East Devon town of Ottery St Mary in June. On Pixie Day, they commemorate the legend of pixies being banished from the town, where they apparently caused a nuisance, and they were sent off to local caves, now known as the Pixie Parlour. Whilst I was visiting Watersmead, where there was an amazingly enchanting cascade of waterfalls, I saw in a tea room Pixie brew being sold in bottles, which I gather is some kind of local strong beer. Now, zoologist Charles Spence Bate, who was an associate of Charles Darwin, stated his belief that pixies were a smaller race, and he says, "From the greater obscurity of the tales about them, I believe them to have been an earlier race of peoples." The English novelist Anna Eliza Bray, who studied pixies and published a book about them in 1854, suggested that pixies and fairies were two distinct and different species of folkloric mythical creatures. And in J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, Tinkerbell sprinkles pixie dust, so we wonder if she was a pixie. And the nature fairy, Robin Goodfellow, also known as Puck, which I'll probably return to in a later show, is also said to be a friendly pixie. My visit to Exmoor. Locus in quo. So while I was in Exmoor on the actual moor, I went to look at the tar steps, which is an ancient stone bridge believed to have been put into place by the devil. I visited some of the pixie places, but also visited Withypool, W-I-T-H-Y, pool. The word withy means in Old English willow, so if ever you see the word withy, you think about willows. And so Withypool, I expected there to be a lot of willow trees and also a pool, or at least some kind of water reservoir, where they would probably soften the willow branches to use in basket weaving or basket manufacture. In actual fact, I saw no willows at all while I was in Withypool, and I spoke to a couple of people who had gone through the town and had been staying there, and neither had they seen any willows, and we couldn't find a pool either. Anyway, Withypool is the capital of Exmoor, and although it's a small village with only 200 people, as a population. It has quite a significant place in the history of Exmoor. The area is believed to have been inhabited since at least the Bronze Age, and there's a stone circle that can be seen on Withypool Hill. And in the 14th century, the famous Old English writer Geoffrey Chaucer was in charge of the village in his duties as the Forester of North Petherton. And the Warden of Exmoor be based in Withypool. The first Warden of Exmoor was apparently Odo. R.D. Blackmore reputedly wrote part of his new romantic novel Lorna Dorne, A Romance of Exmoor, in the bar of the Royal Oak Inn at Withypool. Lorna Dorne was published in 1869. Now, the author was raised in Exmoor, but in actual fact he was born near to where I live, along the River Thames in Berkshire, and he lived most of his long life about 5 miles from here, where I'm speaking from, in the towns of Twickenham and Teddington. But nevertheless, R.D. Blackmore is considered to be an Exmoor hero, an Exmoor artist, and there's even an area of Exmoor known as the Valley of the Rocks, near Linton and Lynmouth, which is known to tourists as the Doon Valley, after his book Lorna Dorne. And in the 1930s, the Royal Oak public house in Withypool was owned and operated by a retired spy ring leader, whose name was Maxwell Knight. He and his wife had retired from the city, and he'd given up spying and started up a tavern in this ancient town or ancient village. Maxwell Knight was known to the James Bond author Ian Fleming, and it's thought that Fleming based his M character on the publican. And if you remember, M is the head of the Secret Intelligence Service in the James Bond novels. Withypool. Myth and magic fantasy news. This week I wanted to tell you about True Fiction. True Fiction is a new series devoted to exploring true fiction. Each week, viewers are taken beyond what they've seen on screens to explore what inspired the fiction we love. Hosted by the actor Kurt Indovina, each episode investigates the origins of pop culture's most compelling stories. And Kurt speaks to experts to find the truths within the tales and goes to analyse how and why the stories have been imprinted on us and on our culture. But the TV show isn't just about monsters and made-up universes. Even pop culture's more grounded touchstones have fascinating histories, like the very real murder that served as the foundation for Twin Peaks, for example. Anyway, you can see the True Fiction show on the GameSpot Universe YouTube channel, and I'll put a link on my show notes. This is a YouTube portal that offers gamers recaps, features and episode breakdowns of their favourite TV shows, and it specialises in giving viewers some fun fan theories from their most successful shows. The True Fiction show begins this September, the 22nd, so it's this weekend, and producers say the new episodes will be released each Sunday. True Fiction. Magic word of the week. To scry, or scrying. Scrying is seeing or peeping into the unknown universe, in other words, seeing into the future, and using a device. The device is generally a crystal ball. And in this respect, scrying differs from other forms of clairvoyancy. For example, clairvoyance, and this is seeing the future in visions, like Fiver the rabbit does in Watership Down. Augury, because this is predicting the future by watching natural signs, often birds in flight, like Romulus and Remus did before they founded Rome. And divination, because this is prophecy using ritual, for example, tarot cards or bones. In my recent novel, Moondog and the Reed Leopard, Moondog's gypsy mother-in-law uses tea leaves to foretell her daughter's fortune. Reflective, translucent or luminescent surfaces are used in scrying. Crystals, stones and glass orbs are of course the favourites. And who hasn't looked into a piece of coloured glass and fancied that they might have seen something unworldly within? A magic mirror is also often used as a plot device and for scrying. This idea became very popular after the Snow White fairy tale, when the mirror on the wall was used by the jealous queen. And the Wicked Witch of the West also uses a crystal ball in the Wizard of the Oz movie. Obsidian candles, or black candles, are used for scrying in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. And the sisters scryed with crystal in the popular TV series Charmed. Joseph, of the Technicolor Dreamcoat fame, might have used a polished silver chalice for scrying, according to the Bible. A Stuart claimed that a highly polished chalice was used for divination when it was planted in Benjamin's sack, and you can read about that in Genesis. Skeptics suggest that scrying is often the result of delusion or wishful thinking. Therefore, it can be a useful plot device for fantasy fiction authors who might want to mislead a reader into thinking of an alternative ending, or who might want to suggest that a character is feeble-minded or open to wishful thinking. So think about using a crystal ball and scrying in your next plot. And one final thought on scrying: it might be considered to be archaic and faintly ridiculous to gaze into a shiny mirrored surface and attempt to see if the future has anything to offer us, or to find out if someone fancies us. But, according to Statista, 2.7 billion people do scrying every single day in 2019. So that's about a third of the world's population. A third of the world's population stare into a mirrored surface every day to see the future, to see how their day will pan out, and perhaps to find out if they're loved and who they're loved by. So scrying is very much alive and with us right now. Just a thought. Scrying. The fantasy writer's definition. This week, the floating timeline. A floating timeline, or a sliding timeline, or sliding time scale also, is a device used by fiction writers in long-running serials to explain why their characters age little or hardly at all over a period of time. And this is despite real-world markers such as notable events or advents of technology happening around them. So in other words, things are invented and things happen, but they never grow older. Many readers will be familiar with this concept through comic book series. For example, in the Punisher series, the Punisher character meets Spider-Man in a contemporary New York setting, even though he's depicted as a recent Vietnam War veteran. So, in real-world terms, this meeting between the Punisher and Spider-Man would have been in around 1962, not in 2019. And likewise, in the Archie comics, the characters, the Riverdale characters, are trapped within a kind of 1950s retro-style Riverdale, and they stay within this kind of trapped setting for over 70 years, never aging beyond their time at Riverdale High, even though the stories run from 1942 all the way through to 2015 in comic book form, and actually beyond those years in television form. Enid Blyton's famous 5 series of novels followed the adventures of Julian, Dick, Anne and George and their dog Timmy. They had 21 summer holiday adventures that were filled with picnics, rock pooling, lemonade drinking and bicycle trips. And though the 5 are perpetually youthful, though Julian, who's the oldest, he eventually reaches adulthood, we first meet them when they're 12 and they stay around about the same ages through all 21 adventures. If Enid Blyton hadn't used the floating timeline device, then Julian would have been 33 by the time they'd finished their adventures. They finished their adventures in Tinker's Field, by the way, in one final foray in 1963. Castles, moors and smugglers' rocks were all featured in many of the famous 5 stories. And in Mystery Moor, they camp with gypsies on moorland, and they recognise horse-drawn caravans and ghostly lights and smugglers' dungeons and all the sort of things that I saw when I was visiting Exmoor this last weekend. Unfortunately, and rather sadly, these ideas about moorland were replaced by the appalling real-world tragedy of the Moors murders. This was a set of child murders which appalled British society in the early 60s. And it felt like at that stage that our innocence and the innocence of post-war Britain had been taken away by Moira Hindley and Bradley. And going back to the floating timeline, J.K. Rowling famously disapproved of trapping her characters within a floating timeline. She said she wanted her Potter kids to experience the pleasures and the pains of growing up and developing. Fabulous Creature of the Week. This week, ABCs. So I've already mentioned that Exmoor is famous for the Beast of Exmoor. And the Beast of Exmoor is a phantom cat, also known as an ABC or alien big cat. Big cats, not alien because they came from outer space, but because they've come from a different region, are large cats, felines, such as jaguars and cougars and even leopards, which are in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, for example, jaguars, cougars and leopards don't live naturally in Britain, so if one was seen in Britain, that would be an alien big cat. Sightings, tracks and predation, like for example the 100 sheep that were savaged by an ABC in Exmoor, are reported in various different countries. Of course, if you had sightings, tracks and predation in Africa or India, it wouldn't be an alien big cat, it would be just their local big cat. They've been seen for a number of years, and there's been a history of seeing alien big cats and of sightings of alien big cats across Great Britain. There are some big cats in Great Britain. There's the wild cat in Scotland, which is a little bit bigger than a domestic tabby cat, and in fact they do crossbreed. And there have been some notable zoo escapees of things like lynx. Now, lynx probably did live in North Britain, in North Scotland once upon a time, although they are extinct in Britain now. There's also some very, very big domestic cats, which I suppose could have turned feral and could have turned into larger breeds, for example, large Burmans and that kind of thing. They could have wandered off and been seen and been mistaken for exotic cats. The radical writer William Cobbett, who used to ride around Surrey, where I live, and make nature notes, and he wrote a famous and very excellent book called Rural Rides, says that as a boy in the 1760s he saw a cat which was as big as a middle-sized spaniel dog climb into a hollow elm tree in the grounds of Waverley Abbey near Farnham in Surrey. It's believed that he saw a North American lynx. And another report appeared in the Daily Express in 1927 of a lynx being seen. And certainly there's been poems and legends of large cats being seen all across Great Britain. In 1903, a Canadian lynx was shot in Devon and is now on show as a stuffed animal in the Bristol Museum collection. And in 1980, a puma was captured in Inverness-shire, Scotland. The capture followed several years of sightings in the area of big cats. In 1989, a jungle cat had been hit by a car in Shropshire and found dead. And in 1991, a Eurasian lynx was shot dead near Norwich, Norfolk. So we know that the actual real big cats do exist. Often they are serval cats or ocelots. Often they are pumas that perhaps have either been released into the wild on purpose or they've escaped from zoos. They even managed to get into city areas, and in a case in 2001, a Eurasian lynx was captured alive by police in Cricklewood, which is a part of urban North London. And this was after a chase across a school playing field. The beast of Bodmin Moor is similar to the beast of Exmoor. It's believed to have been seen on a number of occasions. But the beast of Exmoor was never found, even though they sent in the Royal Marines to try to find it. There is some belief that trophy hunters got to the large cat before the soldiers did. For many hundreds of years, the myth of the spectral black dog, which I mentioned in my first novel, The Last Music Bearer, has persisted in the British Isles. This is a supposedly mythical creature that appears as a large black animal in remote moorland, although there's no evidence for its existence. The black cats seem to be an extension of this mythology, and they share the same elements of the supernatural. For example, they're very hard to find, very hard to see, and very hard to prove. The big cat story is often described as an urban myth and is ripe material for the British tabloid press, which is why there are so many sceptics about it. Moondog, in my latest novel, Moondog and the Reed Leopard, discusses the ABCs, and of course the Reed Leopard is thought to be an alien big cat. Check out my novel, Moondog and the Reed Leopard, on Amazon. Wildflower of the week. This week, Morning Glory. My morning glory is looking magnificent in the early morning sun on this cold and bright autumn morning down by the River Thames here in England. I've got a photograph of this morning's morning glory on my show notes if you want to take a look. It's the third year that I've grown these magnificent blooms from seed, and I would prefer the blue blossoms, and I've tried to grow a number by seed, but they don't seem to make the same headway as the pink blossoms that you'll see in my photograph. And that's possibly because Britain is still a bit too cool for them. They tend to be hot, not necessarily tropical, but hot maritime climate plants. These plants, the morning glory, come from the convolvulus family, with their funnel-shaped showy blooms. They share the same family traits as the sweet potato, so quite useful family of plants. In the British Isles, the common name for the morning glory, which is a lot smaller and a lot more weedy and raggedy, is bindweed. If you had bindweed in your garden, pull it out because it's a nasty weed. But the most showy members of the family are the exotic-looking morning glories, and in fact, mine is an Ipomoea. And it's sometimes known as the Picotee morning glory or the Japanese morning glory, and they're extremely popular plants in Japan. They were believed to have been introduced into the country from China or Korea in the 8th to 9th century, and Japanese city dwellers keenly grow new colours and are often used as adornments along Japanese temple roads. Morning glories tend to only unravel into full bloom in bright sunshine. Thus, the common name morning glory actually does make sense, because I've noticed that quite often my plant here in Britain has lost all its blossom by lunchtime. The plants, and especially the seeds, are extremely toxic, and Aztec priests used the plants for their hallucinogenic properties in rituals. The seeds of morning glory can produce a similar effect to LSD when taken in large doses, and the morning glory seeds give the user lucid hallucinations. If you grow morning glory from seed, be aware that it can become an invasive species. In fact, it is banned in some states in the United States of America. All members of the convolvulus family, which this belongs to, tend to entwine, knot and bind other plants, therefore bindweed. As well as belladonna and Jimson weed and hemlock, morning glory can also be used in the preparation of flying ointment, which I'll cover in another show episode. Morning glory. Call-outs and interviews. So there's no call-outs or interviews this week, but I would like fantasy fiction fans and fantasy fiction writers to contact me so I can call you out. If you have a new book or you have a new artistic project or a new creation that you want to discuss on myth and magic, and you think it will help other creatives, then why not contact me? And I can either share your book or your story or your artwork, or even better, I can interview you about it. So give that a thought. If you go on to my show notes, which are available on my website, which is neilmach, all one word, neilmach.me, and then if you search for interviews or show notes or podcast, you'll see the link there, which details the criteria that I would like you to follow if you'd like to be interviewed or you'd like to be called out. Don't forget to check out the show notes at neilmach.me. See you next week.